Were they both happy? Grandma and Grandpa Morgan? Were they
Yeah,
happy together?
they were.
Did they ever argue?
Oh, yes.
Okay. It's
Oh,
funny when you're not, I mean, I don't remember them. So history tends to take out all the, oh, they had this argument or they had this argument or she didn't like so and so. That's what I love about my grandma Love. If she didn't if she didn't like, so I remember she said something about one of my dad's uncle's wives. She just talked too much, right? Like she was funny. So I'm
he
curious as to
was.
how they really were as people, you know.
How was she as people, Jim?
Do what?
Grandma loved the kids.
Yeah.
And if there was a baby around, she had it on her lap. And she would dance with it if she could get up and didn't and could do it. She would dance with all the babies.
Yeah.
She loved the babies. And she
But
worked so hard through her life. She
she
was
was,
pretty broken.
but she was also very stern. I can remember you don't cross grandma.
No,
That was one of the main things that I learned at a very early age. You do not cross grandma. When she says you do something, then you better do it. Otherwise, it's go out and get me a switch. And she wasn't afraid to use that switch.
no.
I'm your tailbone cut a few times. I know I did.
I got it. I got switched on my legs. I had too many petticoats on to get through good enough. So my legs got switched. But you did get to go out and pick your own sometimes.
But if it wasn't good enough, then she'd go get her own. So you
Yeah,
better have a
it's
good one
true.
to start. She knew how to sting.
Oh, yeah.
But another thing I remember about her was when she went sent you to the store, she would tell you exactly what she wanted and exactly how much it cost, and that's exactly how much money you got. So if they raised prices on anything, she would know it. I don't know how she could do that, but she knew to the penny how much it was going to cost, and that's what she gave you. Unless you could convince her to give you a penny, or so you could get a nickel. Occasionally, let loose of a penny or a nickel, but
Well, how tall was Grandpa Morgan?
He was barely 6 feet.
Okay.
She was taller than he.
And do you know
And
how they met?
yes, they met. He was teaching school in Idaho and came home for Christmas and was told by his brothers and some cousins that these three girls from Orangeville, Utah, were here and they were nieces of the Guyman boys. And they were here for 6 months to see if they could live in that harsh area. And all three of them got married, two of them to the Morgan boys, and one to a Jensen. So these three girls, not sisters, but they were cousins, all went down to have a good time for the summer. They were working hard in a wash house. They were scrubbing clothes by hand on the washboard, and there would be huge amounts of these large families' clothes that would be brought in to be washed, ironed, and ready for the people to come and get that evening. And Uncle Art and Uncle Milt were there visiting their mother and said, no sister of mine's going to work this hard and have such raw, bleeding hands if I can help it. And so they gathered up Grandma. And when the other cousins found out that Milton and Nort were going to take her to the valley, then they wanted to come too. And so that's how Grandma got there. And then Grandpa came for Christmas. They went like the end of summer. And so all these young men that didn't have brides, and there weren't enough of them there to choose from anyway, were courting these three girls. And Grandpa tells the story of going to get Grandma. He had rented a buggy and a horse and went to get her for one of the dances because they had a lot of dances. And the horse wouldn't go for him. And he had plans of putting his arm around Grandma and just snuggling up with her on the carriage, but he couldn't do that because the horse wouldn't go. And he had to walk out in front and pull the reins for the horse to take her home. And so he didn't try that again, he said. And he did buy a Model T, but he couldn't start this darn thing because you have to have a rhythm to crank the crank out front. And he never could get it started. One of the brothers or somebody in the house had to go crank it for him. And then things broke. He needed it fixed and took it to the garage, and it was going to take a lot of money to fix it. And Grandma said, "You can't start it anyway, and you have a bike, and so sell it to the garage." So that's what they did, and they never had another car. And but Grandpa had brothers that would haul his cement mixer to wherever he needed to pour cement. And he put all the footings in La Hera LDS church. In the church, he poured every bit of those footings, and in Sanford Church as well. And the little bucket on it was only like 5 gallons of cement. Just a bucket of cement was all that came out of the cement mixer. So it was many, 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 many days for him to pour even a sidewalk for anybody. But he poured a lot of the sidewalks down in La Hera too. They've all been replaced because of time and the weather and all of that stuff. But he did that back then, and the wages were not really good either, but kept him busy.
Nice. Thank you for that. I love that story.
I remember him riding a bicycle all over the place. It was a girl's bike.
No, that was my bike. He had a boy's bike.
He would ride yours. There, I remember him riding your bike a lot.
Okay. I don't remember that.
That's my memory.
He took me on his boy's bike to one of his jobs because Grandma was sick. And so I sat out on the pile of rocks that goes into the cement mixer and played with the rocks. And while he put mixed the cement and made their sidewalk for him. And it came lunchtime, and I was used to taking naps. And he took off his coat and told me to lay down on it. And he finished working, and the wind, it doesn't matter in the summer or wherever, it was a cold wind. And he let me take a nap on his coat under the tree so I could see him. He wasn't going to run away from me.
Oh yeah,
They sounded like amazing people.
they were.
They were good people.
They were hardworking people.
Yeah.
Grandma was never idle.
No.
Always doing something. She made her own bread. She made her own butter. She made her own soap.
Yeah. That was a process too.
Yeah.
She did. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just wondering if you guys have any stories of their parents. So that would be Mary Eliza, James Guyman, Cena and John. Yeah, yes, right?
But first, Coralie, how are you doing? You getting tired? We can do this. We can finish another day.
No, I'm all right, Jenny. Let's go on a little longer if you can.
Okay, you tell us when it's too much, okay?
Oh, you'll see me fall asleep if it gets to that point.
My dad bores everybody. It's okay.
Yeah, we can do this as many times as you want. That's
I just love seeing you and talking to
yes,
you.
I think this is the greatest thing since anything, really.
I know that. Do you remember the grandma that lived with Cena and John? I can't remember her name, honey.
The grandma that lived with Cena and John.
Yeah.
So Cena and John were Grandpa
was,
Morgan's
No.
Now, Cena
Jensen.
was the grandpa's mom, right?
Yes. They called her Cena. Yeah.
Yes, yes. There was a little grandma that was little like Aunt Marville.
Oh, maybe that was her mom. Her
That
mom
was from
had
Denmark.
yes, from Denmark.
Yes. And I can't remember her name. And I used to know all this genealogy off the top of my head, but the stroke just decided it took away some. Anyway, she lived with them and she did a lot of the cooking. And Grandpa John had a razor strap that he sharpened his razor to shave. And the boys would often get whipped by the grandma when they misbehaved or broke something, because everything that they had was precious commodity. And they were rough and tough boys and big boys. And she would do a lot of the cooking and send them out to get things. And if they didn't come quick as she thought they would, she would go after them. And she would portion out like the dumplings. There would be 3 in your bowl to each one. And she portioned out things like Aunt Marville did. A 9 by 15 pan of Jello would serve all of her family and my family and Jim's family if we were all together at any one time. That's like a 2 by 2 piece of Jello for your salad. And both of them were not well off, the great great grandma or Aunt Marville either, but they made things work. They made things do. And she was feisty, little but mighty, and she would take a wooden spoon and hit him with it. And those wooden spoons were more hefty than our wooden spoons that we buy in the store now.
Imagine.
Did you have something?
Um, when I do all my genealogy, I have to say that I get my favorites, right? Like you just can't help it. And like one of my favorites is Mary Eliza, Aunt Polly. And
Yes.
I just love reading about her. And I got some land records that she homesteaded in, I think it was Lahara or Orangeville or something. And they're just fascinating because a bunch of the Guymans and the Morgans and everybody wrote these letters. And to me, it's everybody was related to everybody out there, right? Like you can look at my grandma school picture, and I don't know who the people are, but I'm thinking that she's probably related to 3/4 of them. you know,
Yeah, you can pretty well count on that.
yeah. And so she was always my favorite to do to read about, and there's a lot of pictures of her. And so then she had brothers, the Jesse Delos Jukes, and then just went on. And so it's just fascinating to hear stories of, even just stories that they might have told you, when you were growing up.
Grandma Morgan told me stories when she was little. Her mom and dad would go over to that grandpa's house. Well, he had several homes because it was a polygamous family. I
Right.
believe there were 5 wives, but Polly was one of her favorites too. She loved her, and she would talk about her most of the time. It worked, she said, because the women cared for them, each other so much. And they each had their own house, but they did the laundry together, and they did the heavy duty preserving of the food and taking care of the children, or whatever. They rotated around and they all worked for the good, and they would have days that they would make soap for the next year, and um, all of those kind of things. And she told us stories of even sewing. They would have to wait and get enough money to, if a wagon came through and had material, they could buy it. Otherwise, they had to spin the wool off of the sheep, or wait until cotton came in and buy 10 or 12 yards of material to make their dresses, because they were long and they had lots and lots of material in them, so that they could either be passed down, or if you got fatter, you had room to grow. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the funny thing about
My sister really got heavy.
the thing about polygamy. When you look at it from our time frame, it just seems perverted. Like, oh, they just want to have more women to mess around with. But
Yeah.
when you look back to the time period of our ancestors, they really actually did, because women couldn't just get jobs. So Mary Jukes, the original, the one that was married to Samuel Jukes,
Yes.
and had her and Sophia or Sophie or something. But Mary had come over with her blind mother and had no way to support them, because the man she was going to marry didn't show up, right?
Right.
So without Samuel marrying her, what would have happened to her? And so when I look at the history of the Mormons and polygamy, and yeah, I'm obviously not a Mormon, so I didn't grow up with teachings of the church or anything, But to me, just from a historical point of view, it actually helped the women in that way, like you said, because they took care of each other. And what would have become of thousands of them when they were ditched once they got here? And it's not like today where women can go get a job or, just live on, state assistance or anything like that. You were just dropped there and had nothing. So in a way, you could look at it, from a man's point of view, but then in a way I look at it, but they did help too. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. That's just my take on it.
I think it was a necessary part of it because there were so many women that lost their homes. Even they were kicked out of their homes when they were in England or Ireland or Denmark. If they joined the church or if they wanted a new life, they didn't want to be a servant to somebody any longer, that they would leave. And so when there were like 9 women per man when they came across the plains. And so to have polygamy in that perspective, then it did. There were some wives that went to the East to get educated medically. So we have some medical doctors and some nurses that were trained back East and came back to help the people. And there were people that were educated to be teachers to take care of all the children that were running around on the streets that didn't have a place to learn or do. So in that case, I think it was a real blessing to those women if they got into a good situation.
Right.
Not all of them worked like the Jukes and the Guyman family, but some did. And I think that it was a real blessing. And Grandma said that she loved going over there because it didn't matter how many children were there. They were all taken care of by all these women.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. It was a great blessing for each of those families and for the cousins to become like sisters and brothers, because like the Morgan family during the Depression, you talked to Aunt Mabel or Aunt Marvell about any of those cousins that were in that house, and they loved them and had so much fun and worked side by side with them. And just as Jim said, Eldon was one of Aunt Nettie and Uncle Lawrence's younger ones. He was the baby of all those girls that they had. And my mom was the youngest, but the other kids that grew up, and they have great love for them, even to this day. Isla Morgan lives in Bountiful, and she was one of Aunt Nettie's and Uncle Lawrence's daughters, and she loves your mom, your grandma.
I would like to talk to her. I didn't know. I don't know many of the relatives out in Utah. I know you, of course, but like my
You need
dad.
Isla and Barb Jean, and they're both still alive to my knowledge.
I
And
wonder
they're out here. Um, Isla. I'll have to look up Isla's. Barb Jean is Atwood. Barbara Jean Atwood, and she has dug into genealogy like crazy. Of course, she isn't the part of the Guyman and Jukes part, but she is the Morgan and Jensen. And
I don't do Jensen much because I don't speak Dutch. So I have myself on my mom's side with this Swedish, and so I kind of let other people worry about that.
yeah,
And
and she's done a good job of it. So you're off the hook.
good because
Just get her records.
I I don't really know much about the Jensens. Um, so it would be nice to talk to her actually.
Barbara Jean also is Valentine, and they come from, I don't know which country. We all came from the countries,
Right.
but Valentine is her mom's part of the family, and they were. John Morgan went on a mission to the southern states for the church and baptized a lot of those people, and they had families, and but they wanted to come to Salt Lake, and they said, you know what, take all of them to the San Luis Valley in Colorado, because there's a trail and even a train at that time. No, that was later. There's passageway that's easier, and take them into the San Luis Valley and go to Pueblo and down, and it was more established, and brought in a lot of children and young brides and people for those young men that got sent to the valley to set up water and crops and get established, but there were no women. So they sent women and families down to them, and men, so they could marry some of those girls, so they weren't all marrying their first cousins.
Don't need that.
Yeah, yeah.